Mushoku Tensei is one of those shows people can praise for a lot of obvious reasons. The world is huge, the production is great, and it has all the adventure you would expect from a fantasy story like this. But when I think about the moments that actually made the show stick with people, it's usually the quieter ones, where the fantasy pulls back and you're just watching someone deal with the damage they don't really know how to talk about yet. It's Rudy and Paul sitting across from each other after both of them failed in different ways. It's Rudeus losing himself in a room while the adventure keeps moving without him. And it's Eris leaving behind a letter that makes sense to her and destroys him anyway. So when Eris comes back years later, it already feels bigger than just a character coming back stronger. Everything about her looks more controlled now, but a part of her that always made her hard to understand never really left. So what happens when a character grows up, but never really gets fixed? There is a version of early Eris that would be very easy for anime to write. You take the angry noble girl, make most of the violence feel like part of the joke, give her one small scene early on where you can tell she cares more than she says, and the audience has a shortcut almost immediately. She's difficult, but the show has already told you how to enjoy her. And to be fair, that version can work really well, because a lot of anime characters are fun specifically because they are exaggerated past the point of reality. A character like that would be exhausting in real life, but in anime, it can work because the show teaches you how seriously to take her. Where she hits someone, the scene doesn't linger on it like a real act of violence. It moves fast, the reaction is funny, and after a few scenes, you understand that this is part of the joke. I think about Taiga from Toradora a lot with this, because on paper, she's also the kind of character who could become unbearable very quickly. She lashes out constantly, and if you just describe those scenes out loud, she would actually sound horrible. But when you're actually watching Toradora, it doesn't really land that way. She's tiny, Ryuji's reactions take a lot of the edge off, and the show gives you a lot of these little glimpses of how lonely she is before her anger becomes the only thing you see. So even when she's being awful, the show has already given you a way to enjoy her. And I don't think that's a flaw. And this is the character that made me think about this, because she feels like she should fit pretty comfortably into the same space. She has a violent introduction, and the kind of personality that usually gets softened before it can become too annoying. And because I already know where she ends up, I think my memory started watching early Eris through the later version of her. Like yeah, she was wild at first. She hit people, she made every scene harder than it needed to be, and then eventually she grew into someone better. That was the easy version I had in my head. But when I actually went back to the beginning, the thing that surprised me was how long Mushoku Tensei leaves her there. The anger is not softened right away. The show takes its time before giving you much to hold on to. For a while, Eris is just genuinely difficult to be around in a way that is harsher than I remembered. And I think that matters, because before we can talk about the Eris who grows up, we kind of have to sit with who she was when we first met her. Because when you actually go back to those tutor scenes, the setup looks so familiar at first. This strangely capable kid walks into the mansion, the girl is immediately impossible, and I think my brain just filled in the rest of the scripts from there. They have some rough lessons, she fights him on everything, and eventually they end up on the same page. Because that's just how these stories go. But the second they sit down together, the whole thing feels a lot more uncomfortable. Every time he corrects her, you can feel the scene tighten up a little. She hates studying, sure, but what seems to bother her more is having someone sit there calmly and watch her fail. And the reason I bring up the mansion around her is because once you notice how badly Eris reacts to being corrected, you start noticing how everyone around her has learned to move around that anger too. There are these little moments where she gets loud and no one really treats it like some shocking thing. They give her space, wait for the noise to pass, and then the mansion just kind of goes back to normal. Because for her, this has probably worked for a long time. She gets angry, and the room reacts, and if that happens enough time, I guess anger starts making sense before anything else does. It becomes a thing she reaches for before she has even had time to understand what is bothering her. So when the kidnapping episode pulls her out of the mansion, it hits harder than I remembered. Because suddenly, Eris is in a room that has no reason to know the rules she grew up with. These people don't care that she's the young lady of the house. They don't care how angry she gets. And she still reacts like Eris, because of course she does, but the feeling of it changes. In the mansion, getting loud made her feel huge. Here, it just makes her feel like a kid who has no idea what else to do. And then the story takes the mansion away completely. The teleportation almost feels like another version of the kidnapping at first. Eris is pulled out of the place she understands and dropped somewhere that has no reason to care who she is. Only this time, there is no quick return to the Boreas mansion afterward. She wakes up on the Demon continent, and after that, the scary part just becomes her life for a while. I don't think we need to treat every step of that journey like some separate lesson for Eris, because a lot of what matters is simpler than that. The journey keeps making the world larger around her, and after a while, strength starts meaning more than swinging at whatever is in front of you. You can feel her becoming useful in a way that actually fits her. The same pride that made every lesson feel like an insult starts pushing her to get back up, and the roughness that made her so hard to deal with in the mansion begins to make sense in a world where hesitating can actually get people killed. Then Orsted appears, and that is one of my favorite moments in the whole show, because it changes the size of the world in a few seconds. By that point, you have spent so much time with Dead End that you start trusting them. Rudeus is clever enough to survive things he probably shouldn't survive, and Ruijerd is strong enough that danger feels manageable when he is nearby. Then Orsted walks in, and suddenly, none of that feels as stable as it did a minute ago. Rudeus gets crushed in front of Eris before she can really understand what is happening. And I think that is the part that scars her in a way nothing before this really did. She has been scared before, she has been helpless before, but Orsted shows her a gap so large that effort alone suddenly feels almost meaningless. She saw how strong Rudeus could be, and then she saw him almost die anyway. She was right there, and being there did not let her reach him. So when she leaves, I think it comes from the fear Orsted left behind. She wants to stand beside Rudeus, and for the first time, she understands how far away from that she still feels. As long as Rudeus is the person pulling her forward, there is a part of Eris that cannot really meet him as her own person. Orsted gives that fear a shape she can understand, and because she's Eris, the answer becomes physical. So she leaves to train, because that is the only answer that feels real to her. The latter is where all of that becomes awful, because from her side, it probably feels clear. She says just enough to explain the decision in her own head, then goes to do the only thing that makes sense to her. Rudeus matters to her, and standing beside him matters to her, so becoming stronger feels like the most honest way to prove that. But from his side, it just looks like she left. When the anime comes back to Eris, I think the first thing that works is that she doesn't feel like she's been waiting somewhere off screen for the story to need her again. That is always the danger when a character disappears for this long. They leave, time passes, and then they come back stronger, with the story asking you to accept that all the important work happens somewhere you could not see. You can tell before the anime explains much, people start forming their own versions of her here, and that version has almost nothing to do with Rudeus. And I think Nina helps with most of that. She does not see Eris through the history the audience brings into those scenes. To Nina, Eris is just a girl who showed up here and became impossible to ignore. You can hear it in the way she talks about her. Like this frustration had already been building before we arrived. Eris is someone Nina has been measuring herself against. And that mix of annoyance and admiration make the times Eris spent here feel lived in. This could have gone wrong pretty easily too. The anime could have made Eris' comeback more pleasant in the obvious way. Maybe that would be satisfying for a different character, but I don't think it would feel like Eris. What I like is that she's still kind of a pain in ways you recognize. She has not suddenly become easy to be around, and you still get the sense that sitting down and explaining herself would probably be the last thing she wants to do. But she feels more settled inside all of that now. The people around her already knows what she's like, and Eris no longer seems like she has to push against every room just to make sure she has a place in it. That is the biggest change I feel when I watch her now. Earlier it was so immediate. If she was embarrassed or scared, it came out almost before she understood it. Now it feels like there is a little more life between what she feels and what she does. The story never had to make her perfect. It just had to let her stay Eris for long enough that the rough part started meaning something different. So when I look at her now, I see someone who grew up with the damage still attached. If you want to see another character who is easy to misunderstand at first, click here for my video on Mao Mao, and why her silence says more than people realize. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, goodbye.